Hello, it's my pleasure to welcome you into The Light from Ocean Reef, a podcast aimed at shining the Bible's light on our daily lives. I'm Dan Meyer, chaplain in residence at the beautiful Ocean Reef community in Key Largo, Florida. Before coming here, I served as the lead pastor of a Chicago area megachurch and as host of an Emmy Award-winning television news magazine. I'm a graduate of Yale University and Princeton and Fuller seminaries, a husband and a dad. And someone like you, I imagine, who's always looking for practical wisdom to make the best of life. I hope this podcast gives you some of that. Well, good evening to each and to all of you, and thank you so much for coming to this gathering tonight. I'm Dan Meyer. I'm the chaplain in residence here at the Ocean Reef Chapel and Fellowship Center, and one of the greatest joys of my experience in this place is encountering the incredible minds and hearts that not only sit in the seats in these places, but come in as special guests to inspire us. And we have got a great evening planned along those lines, and I could not be more excited about it. I also want to acknowledge that we couldn't do this kind of thing. We couldn't go out and find the caliber of speakers we have and convince them to come and join us in this struggling, suffering part of the world were it not for the sponsors that make that possible. And so I want to give a shout out tonight to our friends, to Sharon Van Dellen and to Kim and Bruce Elliott, and to an anonymous donor that have pitched in to help bring Eric Metaxas here to Ocean Reef. For those of you who might just be learning about Eric, well-placed applause. Eric is one of those 10 talent people that you just find annoying the more you get to know them and realize how many things he does so well. He is, as you are, I think, mostly aware, a best-selling author. He has published numerous books, probably the most famous of which would be his work on Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but also an extraordinary book on Martin Luther and one on miracles. And he's a children's book author as well. Has an incredible catalog of work in that area. So if you're thinking about Christmas gifts early, you might check out some of the offerings that he has in that array of work as well. He is a man whose commentary on religion and politics and culture and history is sought after by people all across the spectrum of American life. He is featured on Fox News and on CNN and on MSNBC. I guess it's called MS Now. He is somebody whose work has been translated into 25 other languages that has extended the influence of his thought all around the planet in a marvelous way. You may find yourself inspired by the fact that he speaks to the common issues of life and the deep issues of life in a way that you think, I'd like more of that. Well, the answer is you can get more of that, not only by buying books, but Eric has an incredible podcast that is called Socrates in the City. And you can find that on any of the major podcast outlets, and you will find that to be a very inspiring and diverse, provocative conversation that he has with some fascinating people. He's also host of the Eric Metaxas radio show, which is aired across the United States in some 120 cities and in 80 countries the world over through the podcast channel. And if you've not gotten a sense of it, he's just one of those people that is worth listening to, and lots of people do listen to him. We're all, I think, aware that we're living in a tumultuous and significant time in American life. We're about to hit the 250th anniversary of these United States. And it just feels like on these big anniversaries or big birthdays, and some of us have been through a few big birthdays, we know that there's a tendency in those moments to take stock. And it's important to take stock, to look back, to think about where we began and what we were shooting for when we began, to think about the journey that's gone on since then, and to reset our vision on where it is we feel maybe we want to go. Eric Metaxas has thought a lot about that too. And that is going to be the special focus of his reflections with us tonight. and of an upcoming book on the American Revolution that I'm going to ask him more about when we get to the Q&A section a little bit later. Eric grew up in New York and Connecticut. He was educated at Yale. We were actually at the university together, and he was obviously in the library. I was at the pizza parlor. I never got a chance to get to know him. That was my loss. He is married to Suzanne, who is also with us tonight. Suzanne, we welcome you. Thrilled to have you in the circle. And we hope that they develop enough of positive association with Ocean Reef that they'll want to come back and be with us again in years to come. I do want to acknowledge that when we start talking about sort of taking stock of American life today, we also enter into somewhat challenging territory. The polarization and division of our time leaves us very often unable to have conversations about deep values and the visions that we have for who our country is and what we want our country to be more like. And a lot of the time you get into a conversation like that and it's sort of almost like partisan dynamite. People get triggered easily and their emotions flare explosively, and they lose the ability to actually hear what the other person is saying or to recognize the value of what somebody else is saying or feeling or hoping for. This particular chapel has been built on the foundation of a commitment to being great listeners, to building unity in the midst of a divided world. And we have had a successful way of finding common ground in the midst of even the vibrant variety that we have in a room like this. And I hope tonight you're going to experience that. You're going to sense that what gets clarified for us are some common values and visions that can make a great difference in the future, because it will be, as Eric reminds us, our responsibility and that of our children and our grandchildren to build the future America. And we're going to get some helpful handles on that tonight. A quick word about our format, and then I'm going to bring Eric up. He is going to speak with us, and then we're going to take a little time for some informal Q&A. We have put some question cards on the table at the center at the back. If you wanted to write a question down and pass it in, you could. We're an intimate enough group that I think if you will allow me to bring a microphone to you, and Nick, I think maybe we will get one of those handhelds down here, then we'll get that to you, because we're recording tonight's session and we want everybody to be heard. And we'll take as many questions as we feel we can within the time allotted. And then Eric has very graciously said that he would sign books for those who would like to do that. And so certainly by 8:30, we're going to be out there in the book signing mode. And if you have to be out and on your way, we respect that as well. So the title of tonight's keynote, If You Can Keep It. If you can keep it. And we'll hear the background to that little phrase in just a moment. Would you just join me in giving a very warm welcome to Eric Metaxas as he comes to speak with us.
What a blessing to be here. Thank you for coming. There's so much I want to say, and I think first I have to, whenever anybody introduces me, I'm embarrassed because they're so nice. They only say the nice things. If you want the other side of the story, Suzanne and I have been married almost 30 years, so help yourself. When I'm signing books, you can get the downside. No, it is it's a huge blessing to be here. It's kind of amazing to me to think that we were at Yale all those years ago. And I was so much taller then. We were about the same size back then, but you know, I haven't taken care of myself. I was supposed to be here, I think last year, and there was a big crazy controversy. And just to clear it up, I was having breast reduction surgery at that. I just want you to know, I'm public about it. And I lived with that and I said, enough is enough. I'm going to get it done. So you've been a great audience. Good night. Thank you very much. Actually, in the introduction, that might not be true. In the introduction, the issue, I'm always seriously astonished because I've done so many different things in my life, right? And a lot of times people say, oh, that's very eclectic. You've done all that and this and this and this and this. You could also see me just as scattered, right? Because I've just done so many different kinds of things. But it really was the Bonhoeffer book that kind of put me on the map. Some of you are familiar with it. It's a 600-page book on a German theologian who I revere, a great man, who was killed by the Nazis. And um, that book really kind of changed my career. I think a lot of people got to know about me. And it is true that my many books have been translated into 25 languages or more. But the good news for you English speakers is that they will all be translated back into English this year. That's something I promise you that's going to happen. All right. Have you had enough of the nonsense? I know you have. Um, I want to tell you a little bit about my story as I introduce the topic of the evening, if you can keep it, which is something Benjamin Franklin said. I'll explain that. But my story is just that well, it starts with my mom and dad. My mom and dad came to the United States from my mom grew up in Nazi Germany, which is what led me to write the Bonhoeffer book. She escaped. It became East Germany, which, as you know, was slightly communist, just a little bit. And any Stalin fans in the room? I hope not. I'm not willing to be that bipartisan. If you're a Stalin fan, please get out. But my mom escaped at age 17 from East Germany by herself and came to the United States in 1954. My dad came from Greece in 1955. They met in an English class in New York City, in Manhattan. And when I say English class, we're not talking about Chaucer and Milton. You understand, right? So, so I was raised. If you're raised in a home that is a Greek immigrant and a German immigrant, that means you will be raised Greek. In case you're wondering how that breaks, it's like rock, paper, scissors, right? Greek. Well, Greek wins. So I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I guess I just had a normal. When I was 8 or 9, we moved up to Danbury, Connecticut. Kind of middle class world, and went to the public schools there. And I'm going to touch on that. But went to the Greek church on every Sunday, but really didn't have much figured out. And then I went to Yale University. And when I got to Yale University, I don't know what Dan's experience was, but I feel like whatever faith I had or whatever patriotism I had was just washed away. It was not a time, to be patriotic or to say I love Jesus or I read the Bible or whatever. So I feel like I got a little brainwashed by the secular culture there. And I graduated and I was very confused generally in life. And then I had a dramatic born again experience around my 25th birthday. Total miracle. You can't make it up. I had nothing to do with it. I was unconscious. It just kind of happened. And it really changed my life dramatically. And I said, God is real. The Bible is true. I lived in a world that didn't even acknowledge that could be possible. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Didn't know what I wanted to write, really. It's kind of funny. But after that experience, it just shaped me into just wanting to give my life to God, to his purposes. And the Lord has taken me on a strange, very peripatetic journey over the decades, doing so many different things. I worked for VeggieTales. I've written for the New York Times. I've written for the Atlantic. I've just done all different kinds of things. I should mention the New Yorker, since I know there's a Florio in the room someplace. But I never really thought, most of my books, I never really planned to write them. Then something just happens. And a number of years ago, some of you may know Os Guinness. Do you know anybody here know Os Guinness? He's a very dear friend of mine. In fact, I dedicate the book to him since I stole his ideas and I don't want him to sue me. So I figure if I dedicate it to him. But he's an extremely dear friend. And in fact, Dan mentioned Socrates in the City. That's a forum. We just had an event in Palm Beach recently, but I've been doing that for years. He really helped me come up with the idea. So he's just an extremely dear friend. But he wrote a book, I think in 2014, called A Free People Suicide, which is a phrase taking really from Lincoln. Lincoln gave a famous speech when he was a very young man. It's kind of shocking. He was like 28 years old, and it was at the Springfield Young Men's Lyceum. And the 28-year-old Lincoln gave a speech in which he talks about America. And it's an amazing thing because here it is, 1830 something, and he's talking about how the revolutionary generation is dying off and we're forgetting what everybody knew. It's going away. And we can lose the country if we lose the vision they had. And so as he's talking about it, he basically says that to be a free people, this is 28-year-old Lincoln, to keep the republic, so to speak, we have, it takes something from us. We have to do something about it. It doesn't keep itself. America doesn't just go on because the Constitution is sitting somewhere in a safe. We have a part to play, a part in that. So Os Guinness wrote a book called The Free People's Suicide, kind of asking that question. And in the book, he talks about more about these issues. And I was really thunderstruck reading the book because I thought, I've had a good education. I grew up in America. I've never really thought about this ever. And I've certainly not heard it spoken of much. But Oz really woke me up to these ideas and it got me thinking, and this book comes out of that. So I really, in dedicating the book to him, that's just not a friendly thing. It really wouldn't exist if not for Os Guinness, because he woke me up to these ideas. And it makes me even more embarrassed because, he's not an American citizen. He's British and he understands this stuff better. So that's just the way it is sometimes. So the phrase, if you can keep it, I know some of you will remember it and some of you won't. I didn't really know where it came from, but in 1787, as you know, in the summer of 1787, a number of the folks we call the founders went into Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Why? Because the government that they created, or the country they created in 1776, and that they won the victory in 1783, it wasn't really working out so great. They figured we've got some problems. We kind of need to go back to the drawing board. And so a number of them in summer of 1787 go into Independence Hall, and for 100 days in the heat, they hammer out what eventually is our Constitution. I'm sure you've heard of that. It's a document. But it really was a miraculous thing, and people throw the term miraculous around. It was miraculous. I mean, if you read accounts of it, it's a big deal because never in the history of the world had people come up with this idea that we're actually going to govern ourselves. We're not going to be governed by anybody, by some bureaucracy or some tyrant or whatever. We're going to govern ourselves. Now, if you're American, you understand, yeah, that's what we do. But I think we've lost sight of the wildness of the idea. It's not a normal idea. In the history of the world, it had never really been done. And I'm speaking as a Greek, a proud Greek, right? We invented democracy. Well, let me tell you, the democracy they had in Greece, in ancient Greece, this was like just a little flicker for a few decades. It was nothing like what we have in America. And so the idea that they had to go back into Independence Hall to figure this out, and the question was, can we do it? Because I want to say it again, and I assume if you're like me, you haven't really understood how crazy it is that we pulled this off. Because we think, what's the big deal? Here we are. It had never been done before. And the reason it had never been done before, there are many reasons, but one of them is that human beings are sinful, troublemakers, and, a government, we need to be governed by somebody, at the point of a sword or a gun to say, if you do this, you're in trouble, you're going to jail. If you do that, so you need a government so the idea that people could somehow govern themselves just had never been done. And so Franklin is leaving the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin, and he was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention. And he, as he's walking out of Independence Hall, a Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia, she was a notable figure, society figure of that day. And she approaches him and says, "What have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A monarchy or a republic?" And I always thought, this is a joke, right? Because a monarchy, what are you talking about? Well, everybody knows they created the Constitution and we have a republic and, what are you talking about? But I realized at that time, this had never been done before. They didn't know if you could pull it off, because the whole idea of needing a constitutional convention, needing to get together to create a constitution, was that it wasn't working. The federal government was too weak. Can you imagine that? Try to imagine. That's insane, right? that the federal government wasn't strong enough. There's no federal government. We need more. We need a stronger federal government. Could they pull it off without creating some kind of a soft monarchy? Nobody had done it before. So Mrs. Powell wasn't being cheeky when she says to her friend, Dr. Franklin, "What have you given us, a monarchy or a republic?" She genuinely didn't know. And it may well have been that Franklin's answer would have been, well, it's some kind of a monarchy, but it's not King George or whatever. We have these rights and that right, but it's still some kind of a soft monarchy. But we're just going to have good kings, But it wasn't. So his response, his famous response, and this is off the cuff. He didn't prepare this. She says, "What have you given us, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic?" And he says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Now, we know he didn't prepare that because the only reason we even know he said it is that I think the youngest member of the Constitutional Convention, McHenry, was standing nearby and overheard, this eminent figure, Franklin, talking, and he overheard this and wrote it in his journal. So Franklin, off the cuff, says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Now, what he means, if you can keep it, he means like if you can keep it like you keep a garden, you tend a garden. Like if you can keep it together, if you can keep it going, we've given you a monarchy, a republic, but we don't know what you're going to do with it. We don't know what you, Mrs. Powell, and your friends and everybody, there's nothing about it. There's nothing that we can guarantee that it's going to keep going. So we've given it to you, but you could destroy it in 5 minutes or 5 years or 50 years. It's that fragile. And I really think we've lost the sense of that because we have. And so he says this, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Now, what does it mean then to keep the republic? And what is our job in keeping the republic? What does that mean? Well, ultimately, Os Guinness writes about something called the Golden Triangle of Freedom. And he's like many Englishmen, he's very humble, and he kind of pretends like, oh, my idea of the Golden Triangle of Freedom, it's no big deal. All the founders understood this idea. And I thought, what a load of baloney. Since I'm an American, I can say that. What baloney. This is a brilliant idea. This is a brilliant formulation that I've never heard ever. And I kept thinking, you didn't get, where did you get this from? This is an amazing idea. All the founders, they all understood this. So they understood this dynamic, but they never really summed it up the way Os Guinness did. And I was so taken with it that I said, I really need to write a whole book about this because this is an astonishing thing. And Os Guinness is just too polite to, scream about it. We need to scream about it. It's a brilliant idea. It's the center of who we are as a people and how we keep the republic. And if ever we needed that, we need it now. Because ever since I've been growing up, we really haven't taught this stuff. I think some of you are a little older than me, so maybe when you were kids, everybody knew this stuff. But, by the time we got to Yale, forget about it, kids. It's not happening. So I want to say what the Golden Triangle of Freedom is, and then I want to explain it. Okay, so the Golden Triangle of Freedom, in a nutshell, is freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith, and faith in turn requires freedom. Okay, what does that mean? Freedom. First of all, you have to say, what is freedom? Now, a lot of people don't even know what freedom is. We haven't thought about it. We typically, if there's any headline here, it's that we just take this stuff for granted. We are so blessed that we're spoiled and we take this stuff for granted. We hardly know what freedom is because most of us haven't lived in, North Korea or China or any place where they're going to challenge you on certain things. We've always had freedom. We can say whatever we want about anything and we can do what we want. Freedom, ultimately, another word for it is liberty, but another word for it is self-government, right? When they were talking about liberty, they're talking about self-government. We're going to govern ourselves. We're not going to be governed by a king. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. You're free. Now, of course, that has limits. It doesn't mean you can free to be wild. This is not anarchy. It's not license. But liberty, the founders really thought this is a sacred idea that we could be free and actually govern ourselves. But every single one of the founders, understood that freedom requires virtue. In other words, if you want to govern yourself, you're like, okay, you're free to govern yourselves. If you're virtuous people, that's not a problem. But if you're monsters, if you're vicious people in the etymological root of the word vicious, people of vice, you can't govern yourself. Somebody's going to need to come in with a sword or a gun or whatever and stop you from, taking advantage of other people. The only people who can govern themselves are people that, when you leave them to their own devices, they don't, rape and kill and steal and right. So that self-government, this idea only happens, the founders said, with a virtuous population. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's going to be virtuous, but generally speaking, that it's a culture that it's a culture of virtue. Every one of the founders understood this. There wasn't like, 12 Christian founders. Every single founder got this idea that freedom requires virtue. They also got the idea, and I'm writing this gigantic book on the American Revolution. Actually, I've written it, which is coming out in June, and the title's easy to remember. It's called Revolution. But nobody understood this better than George Washington, but almost all of the founders said this over and over, that freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you believe in something higher than yourself, right? If I believe God doesn't want me to steal or cheat or da-da-da-da, and I fear God and love God and I want to serve God, I don't need the government to tell me not to steal. I'm not going to steal because I want to honor God. So the founders observed that people of faith tend to be people of virtue. Now, that doesn't need to be the case. You can be an atheist who acts in a virtuous way. You just don't know why. But the point is that the founders saw this almost as sociologists. They observed that when people kind of get crazy about God, when revival breaks out, because George Whitefield was preaching, evangelizing up and down the 13 colonies, when people get serious about God, crime goes down, domestic abuse goes down. It creates a culture of virtue. So they saw this connection, and so they all wrote about it, that freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith. But here's the key. Faith, in turn, requires freedom. So round and round it goes. What do we mean by that? We mean that if faith requires freedom, because you cannot coerce virtue. You cannot coerce faith. If you're going to coerce faith, tell everybody, listen, we figured it all out. You all need to be at this church at this time and read the Bible 15 minutes a day. And if you don't do that, we're throwing you in jail, right? Suddenly, you'd realize, oh, that's not freedom. Freedom is free. Freedom has to be 100% free. So we cannot coerce virtue. I mean, coercion and freedom are antithetical. So there's a conundrum that the founders said, well, freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, but faith requires freedom. We need to make faith utterly optional. The government that's where we get the concept of separation of church and state. The government cannot take a position on this issue. Just like we're supposed to have a free market, right? The government's supposed to stay out of that and let the free market do its thing. Same thing with the freedom of ideas, with the market of ideas. The governments, they have in the Constitution, we have the non-establishment clause, right? That Congress cannot make a law saying that everybody has to go to this church or that mosque or that temple, or that nobody can go to church. The government has to stay out of that business. It's free for the people, okay? So the founders all understood that that's the only way it can work. Will it work? We don't know. We don't know. But this idea of the golden triangle of freedom, I thought they all did understand it, and it's not something that I've ever heard until I read Os Guinness's book, because I've never really understood exactly what freedom is and exactly how it works. And so when Franklin says, a republic, madam, if you can keep it, the question is, how do you keep it? What do we do? If you cannot coerce it, if the Constitution doesn't keep itself, it's a dead piece of paper with some black marks on it. It's up to we, the people, to live it out, to understand what it says. And how does that work? Well, part of what the founders were getting at is that if we don't have a culture of virtue, it goes away. If we don't have a culture where there is some faith. Now, again, they weren't telling you exactly what kind of faith. They weren't telling you, but they're saying, like, we just know if you don't have it, it doesn't work. But they can't legislate it. They can't do, because all of the people that came to our shores came from countries where they were forcing legislating faith, right? And if you dissent, you're in trouble. So all of the pilgrims who came to Plymouth in 1620, why did they do that? Because King James was a son of a gun. Some of you know the history. King James was not nice. He didn't believe in religious liberty. He said, this is England. I'm the King of England. You're going to be a member of the Church of England. And if you're not, you're going to jail. You're going to be persecuted. Now, do Episcopalians still persecute people today? Some uncomfortable laughs. You do, don't you? So they decided, we're going to move to Holland. We're going to I know there's some Dutch people here. You identify with this. We're going to go to Holland. Everything will be wonderful. Well, it wasn't. Their kids were starting to speak Dutch. They didn't like that. So they went to Plymouth. Why? Now, this is just one example. But they all said, we want to be free, to have our own religious community, to worship as we like, to think as we like. We can't do that in England. Now think about this, because we think, well, England. In England, if you dissented from the Church of England, you were in big trouble. And, if you know that history, it didn't start in 1620. But this was true all over Europe. And so anybody that was serious about God of the Bible, obviously a lot of this comes out of the Reformation, they were being persecuted. They said, we want to be free. So they came across the ocean, tremendous sacrifice. Again, we hardly think about this, what they went through. They went through hell just so they could practice their faith. And that culture had been established in the 13 colonies. And so by the time you get to the Revolution, and again, I've just spent over a year writing this book, but it's kind of an amazing story. It's the story of the birth of America. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. It makes me proud to be an American. But they came over here simply to be free. And when that was challenged by the British during the Revolution, they fought and they won. But they still, as they wrote the Constitution, had to figure out, how do we do this? How do we keep the republic? And they realized there is no formula. It cannot be legislated. So in the course of writing this book, I thought, this is very interesting, because for 250 years, mostly we have kept the republic. Mostly we have succeeded. But the freedom that we have goes away as virtue and faith evaporate. Now, again, you don't need to be a person of faith, but what I'm saying, it's like math. It's just a sociological experiment. If you don't have people of faith, why would somebody be a good person? You at least have to have a culture of virtue. And so the founders did not have an answer to this. They only knew that if you don't have robust communities of faith where people answer to a higher power and do the right thing because they answer to the higher power, or because they're part of a culture that somehow looks to a higher power. It could even be, Roman Republican values. I mean, you don't have to be an evangelical Christian, but this is what the founders are looking at, and they said, we don't have an answer. We just know this is how it works and this is how it fails. And so Lincoln, in 1838, as a young man, is wrestling with this, because he already sees erosion of this. And so he starts to talk about it. He writes, I don't know if I quote it in the book. I don't remember. When you write books, you don't remember everything that's in them. But because I wrote this book, came out in 2016. But I guess, well, one of the things I wanted to say was that we've also forgotten that what made 1776 possible was the preaching of George Whitefield. George Whitefield was a sawed-off lunatic evangelist. That's putting it positively. He was so zealous he arrives in 1739. I think he's 21 or 22 years old. He was already a phenomenon in England. and all the churches of England like kicked him out because he's making them look bad, right? You know, if you've got a nice church going and some guy like this comes up, he shakes it up. You're like, you know, we're not gonna let you preach here again. You're trouble. So he starts preaching in the fields, and suddenly thousands of people are coming to hear him, and they'd never heard what he was preaching before. What he was preaching was, you could phrase it a number of different ways. The new birth, you know, this idea that we have to have a direct relationship with God. And so it's good to go to church and you can, you know, do the sacraments, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we have to look directly to God. God wants to have a relationship with us personally. And it's a message of grace, which a lot of the people in these churches hadn't been hearing. For them, it was morality and stuff like that. And so he had tremendous numbers of adherents. And then he decides to come over to America. So in 1739, he gets off the boat in Philadelphia, and he was already famous. Ben Franklin had been printing his sermons from England in the American papers. And so he's famous. And wherever he went, he would attract thousands of people. Now, a lot of people were skeptical. They thought, come on, like how many thousands of people? Because they didn't have great microphones in those days. Did you know that? Yeah. They were diesel powered, not very good. So how many people could he speak to? It was written in the papers that he's speaking to, like, 25,000 people. I'm not so sure that's possible. Franklin, being the Yankee skeptic, says, I'm going to perform an experiment. Franklin would do this kind of stuff. He performs an experiment. Whitefield is preaching from the top of the courthouse steps someplace in Philadelphia, and thousands of people are arrayed to hear him. Franklin walks backwards through the crowd, keeps walking until he really can't hear Whitefield's voice. And then he does like a math problem, and he draws, a half a circle, and figures out how many people could actually hear his voice. And it was about 25 to 30,000. So it was true that where he went, he was having this tremendous effect on people, and people were finding faith in a new way. And some of you probably know this, right? You can go to church your whole life and never really get it. You're just kind of, being a good person or being traditional or whatever. But he somehow was able to reach people. And the founders saw that over the course of his preaching through the decades, revival broke out. And so this is what we call the First Great Awakening. You've heard of it. It was on the test in 8th grade. And the First Great Awakening made it possible for self-government, because if you have enough people that are kind of like, yeah, we're answering to God directly, so government can do what it wants, but we're gonna do the right thing, it works. So the founders all understood this, including Franklin, who was not a standard issue Christian, right? But they kind of just saw that this is a good thing. But at the heart of it, and this is part of what Lincoln writes about, is you need virtue, you need all that kind of stuff, but people need to understand how this works and need to love the country. Now, this is a difficult thing to articulate. What does it mean to love a country? We're not talking about idolizing the country. We're not talking about worshiping the leader, but to love, you have a healthy patriotism, which says, I love America. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? Don't you love God more? Yeah, I love God more, but it doesn't mean I don't love America, right? My love of God is supposed to make me love my wife more. It's not a competition. It's not a zero-sum game. We are not Marxists. So it really was interesting that Abraham Lincoln says that we have to celebrate America. We have to celebrate the stories of America. We have to teach our children about the heroes, about George Washington and Nathan Hale and Jefferson and Adams. This has to be part of our culture. We have to celebrate this because it doesn't keep itself. We have to know what we have, this fragile gift of liberty. We have to understand how it works, how it falls apart, and we have to pass it on to the next generation. We have to share it with our neighbors. It doesn't keep itself. It goes away if left to its own devices. And so I remember, I'll close with this. Well, two things briefly. What made me really think about this for the first time was right after 9/11. Suzanne and I, our daughter was 2, and we were taking a speed ferry from 34th Street on the east side of Manhattan, where we live, to the Jersey Highlands. And I went up to the top deck of the speed ferry and I looked over and the Twin Towers were gone. And I thought, whoa. And then there's the Statue of Liberty. And I got absolutely choked up. And there's something so noble and beautiful about Lady Liberty in the harbor holding out the torch of liberty. I thought, what a beautiful idea. When my parents passed that in ships in 1954 and 55, they got choked up. They're not cynical Americans. They didn't go to Yale. They got choked up at the idea that we get to go to America. Wow. And I remember that moment in 2001, getting choked up and thinking for the first time in my adult life, I love this country. What is this that we have, that we've taken for granted, that we could lose? And it made me think, the first time I've had that feeling was June 14th, 1973. I was in 5th grade in Mrs. Saul's class at Beaverbrook School in Danbury, Connecticut. And having gone to a Greek parochial school, Greek Orthodox parochial school, I never heard about Flag Day or any of this kind of stuff. But now I'm in 5th grade, moved to Connecticut, and Mrs. Saul takes us out to the flagpole. It's June 14th, it's Flag Day. I never heard of Flag Day. And we stood around the flag. I don't know, I think we held hands and we sang "My Country 'Tis of Thee." And at the time it was very moving, but I was only 9. But remembering it all these years later, it's like, this teacher was teaching us to love our country. I will never forget it. It's like a hallowed moment. I mean, I write about all this in the book, but I thought that's important. I mean, it's important for anybody in every country to have a love for your culture and your people. That's important. It's sick not to love your people or your country or whatever, your culture. There's something beautiful in that. But in America, especially, if we don't have it, we lose it. And so ultimately, that's why I wrote the book, because I thought this is not something that I have heard very much as an adult. And I think that America is unique and beautiful, and we need to do what we can to keep it. And so we need to start by talking about it. So I'll stop there, and I know we have time for Q&A. Thank you very much. So who?
Take a slug of water.
Okay, I sure do.
So we really would like to make this your time and pursue the things that are of curiosity to you. I'm going to prime the pump by asking one initial question, but then we'd love to hear what thoughts you have. If you are willing to take the microphone and ask the question, I will come out and pass it to you to do that. If you prefer to write your question on a card and send it up here, so you don't have to have a microphone in your mouth, feel free to do that as well. So, Eric, and I know the answers to this are going to be spelled out in your writing, but give us a little hint of one or two things you feel it's pretty important that American citizens today personally do to help our country become stronger in the future.
Well, I think I didn't say it, but I should have said it, which is why it's good to have Q&A, because then I get to say the thing I forgot. We Americans have to be involved. If you want to live in North Korea, you don't have to be involved. You have to do anything. They'll tell you what to do. But if you want to be free, you have to participate. Now, what does that mean? It means different things to everybody. Not everybody is going to participate in the same way. We all have different gifts. But we have to care about the republic, and we have to, pay into it somehow. And again, what does that mean? It can mean any number of things. But I think the most simple thing, and I write about this a little bit in the book, but take time, on July 4th or at any time to read about the country, to know American history. It actually matters. It matters. If you don't know your history, and if you don't know how this stuff works and who the heroes are and the story, it really does go away. We are freedom is exceptional in that sense, is that it does not keep itself. You have to, you have, I'm trying to think, there's a great Star Trek episode, the original Star Trek, the good one. And I remember, it's so funny because these ideas were so built into the warp and the woof of the culture that even in a Star Trek episode in the late 60s, they would get this idea of like, freedom. And I think it was, I'm sure, I'm sure it was William Shatner as James Tiberius Kirk, who said something like, it was sort of like, you can have everything taken care of for you. And he was like, I don't want that. I want to be free. I want to, like all Americans were trained to like, no, I don't want you to, you're going to put me in a cage and feed me and take care of me. No, I want freedom. And I remember that idea. It's like, yeah, if you want freedom, it's harder than being a slave by being in bondage. But that's what led to the American Revolution. And I know it better than ever just because I wrote this book. But the people of the revolutionary generation really got this, that Britain was basically saying to them, we're going to kind of tell you what to do in some ways, and it's not going to be that bad. Just do it and shut up. And they said, we cannot. We want to be free. We will not accept it. That for us, that's accepting slavery. It's accepting bondage. They took it that seriously. And I think we need to understand that we've been given a gift. Let's just start there. We have been given a gift to live in this country and to have self-government so that I can say whatever I want about the government. I can be involved. I can run for office. I can fight to get somebody elected. That idea is a beautiful idea. So the idea that some people don't even vote or they don't care, I think this is the wrong country. You need to, so ultimately being involved it's vital, whatever that means to you.
Can you be can you love America and be critical of America?
Obviously, that's the whole point, right? In other words, it was people that love America that abolished slavery, right? They said we cannot have a country like that. We have to do something about it. And I talk about this in the new book on the Revolution, that what is the DNA of our conception in 1776, that if you trace that, the whole idea is of being faithful to that, Lincoln says, the nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So living that out, clearly in 1776, that hadn't been lived out yet because we still had slavery. And that's just one gigantic example. But that goes on, that we have a duty to say, wait a minute, we're off. This is wrong. This is that I think sometimes we think, and this is where freedom goes away and you lose everything, is when you start thinking of the government as them. The government is not them. We the people are the government. But we, the people, have to behave like the government. We, the people, have to govern ourselves. We have to make sure we elect the right people. We have to get otherwise, we, the people, are not the government. And if the government is them and not we, the people, there's no longer liberty. It's no longer America. And there are many people that would be content with that because they don't really appreciate what we have. So yeah, that's an easy one. Of course, we have to criticize. That comes with it. There's no way around it.
Questions from you?
I prefer true or false questions.
What's the first thing we should try to do with our government to make it more responsive to the people? We just had a lecture recently where term limits, a lot of different, doing away with the
it's
electoral
funny.
college and
I'm
so
not
on.
sure that I agree with term limits. I think that's debatable. I would say it's debatable. But what made me think of this recently is I was at an event in Palm Beach and Governor DeSantis spoke. And I thought, this guy is such a great governor. Why do you have to get rid of him for the next term? Like, I just thought it's kind of funny. Like if people, we elected FDR 4 times. It kind of cuts both ways. But you didn't ask about term limits. You're asking really more about what can we do. Was that your question? I'm sorry. Say it again.
They listed 10 things that we need to try to do, as many of them as we could, for the people to get control of the government.
Yeah.
Because right now, I do feel like
Yeah.
it's them and
Oh, yeah.
not me.
Well, I mean, listen, I think this is kind of the idea of like, do we criticize, if you love America, do you criticize America? And it's like, well, of course. In other words, if you see the government grow and grow and grow and grow until it's no longer responsive to we the people, you say, okay, we've grown too much. This is not healthy. And I see how it happened. Most people meant well, whatever, but it's like anything else. It's in a corporation. You have to self-correct. And so I think reducing the size of government is number one. I mean, in our lifetimes, government has grown and grown and grown and grown, and it clearly is less responsive to the people. There's something wrong. And what it does is it inoculates us. We think, well, I don't have to do anything. There's a big bureaucracy taking care of it. If there's a big bureaucracy taking care of it, you got a problem. There's something unhealthy there. And I remember I even noticed this when George W. Bush was president, and he said, we had the 9/11 attacks, and he basically says, well, you don't need to do anything, just like go shopping, right? And it's kind of funny, but I thought, the idea of having like a professional army, like that cuts both ways. Like if we're going to go to war, able-bodied men, I would say, need to be willing to die for the country. Is it, we've had wars in the past where, I have to say, do we have to go to war? We have to go to war. Okay, I have to put my life on the line. It has to cost us something. It can't be farmed out to some expert class. And to me, that was the classic example. It was like, no, we've got an army and we'll send them over there. And you think, well, wait a minute. If we got a real problem, we all need to get involved somehow. I mean, World War II, people are growing victory gardens and doing all kinds of stuff. Like, are we in or not? And that really, we've lost that over time. So
we've got 2 questions relating to 2 of your past books that may bear on this moment, but let me just give them to you. One of the things that strikes me about Bonhoeffer is how certain the German church was that it was defending Christian civilization, and how wrong they were about that. Having lived so deeply in that history, what's your personal method for making sure that sincere conviction isn't being substituted for truth?
Well, you can never get out of that conundrum because you're dealing with human beings, and we all are subject to temptation and delusion, and you know who you are. It's the human condition. And what happened in Germany, I've done a lot of speaking in the last several years because I saw happening in this country what happened in Germany in the 30s. And what I mean by that is the church said, we don't do politics. And I thought, what an insane idea. I mean, when slavery was a thing in America, it was Christians who, because of their Christian faith, said, we need to stand against slavery. They had a moral issue, and they said, we need to get involved, and we need to bring about the abolition of slavery. So churches need to get involved on moral issues, and if moral issues become political, who cares? There's nothing in the Bible that says if something's political, you shouldn't get involved if you're a Christian. That's nonsense. But a lot of us have bought that idea, and all the Germans bought that idea. Not all the Germans. Many German pastors and churches bought that idea. Like, well, you know what? That's not our thing. We just want to have a nice church service on Sunday morning. Well, if millions of Jews are being hauled off to be murdered, and you're a Christian and you do nothing about it, do you think God's not going to judge you? You have to do something about it, or you have to speak out, or you have to do something. But they had this idea that that's not our thing. we just do church. And that's theologically mistaken. And it's kind of funny because in doing the research for the book on the revolution, the same question comes up. How could they go to war? Because many of them were very devout Christians. How can they go to war with England? Go to war, pick up a gun, and what are you doing? They had a conviction that they had a moral obligation to stand against the government if the government was wrong. And there was a famous sermon preached in 1750, a guy named Jonathan Mayhew in Boston. And John Adams said everybody read that sermon. And that 1750 sermon was really Jonathan Mayhew wrestling with the famous passage, Romans 13, that we're supposed to be subject to the governing authorities. You know, we've all read that, or we know that. And the Bible says you're supposed to, you know, obey the speed limit and obey the laws. And like, yes, but what if the government is telling you to do something against your faith? Now you have to think about it. You have to think, I'm not just going to do what the government says because it says to do. I've got a moral obligation. And so the Germans, and, you know, Bonhoeffer wrote about this idea of cheap grace, that you get this kind of coming from Luther. All of these ideas are held in tension, right? You know, that there's this idea that, yes, we're supposed to obey the government, but at what point do I say we have a problem? Now, you have to be careful about it, you know, civil disobedience, you have to be respectful. But at some point, if you've tried everything, just as, you know, it says in our declaration, you know, we tried this and petitions and so now, you know, we're gonna break free. We declare our independence. So at some point, you have to do something. And I think that Bonhoeffer was trying to get the German churches, desperately trying to get the German churches to wake up and to say, you've got to stop playing this game. This is a moral issue. And if you Christians do not stand up now, you're guilty. You have no excuse. And I think that's true at every time. And there's certain times when you're more tempted to do nothing than others. And, you know, if you're comfortable, it's not affecting you, you say, well, but God expects us to step up. So that was, that's what led really to the horror of the Third Reich, was the churches saying we don't get involved in politics.
So this person writes, loved your book on Luther. Do you think the Catholic Church regrets not listening to him? I am a Catholic, the person writes.
Yeah. Well, the Luther book, I'm very proud of the Luther book because I'm not Catholic, but I'm a very pro-Catholic, non-Catholic. And I thought the story of Luther was the 500th anniversary of the Reformation in 2017. And some friends of mine said, oh, you got to write about Luther. It's an amazing story. It's a crazy, amazing story. And the more I looked into it, I thought what happened in the Reformation really led to the modern world. And it's very interesting. So I wrote the book on Luther. But in the course of writing the book on Luther, some takeaways that I picked up, and it always amazes me when I write a book, I discover stuff that I had no idea. But we all have these preconceived notions, many of which are just not true. So the idea that Luther was some firebrand who wanted to start his own church is just not true. He was as faithful a son of the Catholic Church as you could ever dream of being. But it was because, it's kind of like talking about, you know, if you love America, do you criticize America? It was because he loved the church that he felt a moral obligation to try to help the church see this blind spot, because, you know, there's a lot of corruption, and he wasn't the only reformer. I mean, you had, you know, St. Francis and many others through the years trying to reform the church. And so I do think there are times when something really almost doesn't make sense. Like if you look at the story of Pharaoh, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, so if Pharaoh were not an idiot, he would have never did what he did, and the Israelites would never have broken free. I feel the same way with King George III. That when you look at the story, you think he makes one stupid mistake after the other. He didn't need the American colonists did not want to break free. They just wanted him and Parliament to acknowledge their basic rights. They weren't asking for anything that wasn't already in the British Constitution. And similarly, the papacy in Luther's time was almost crazily closed to the idea. I mean, he was suggesting things that if in a corporation you suggest something, if it's a good idea, you know, you'd like them to think, you know what, you're right. We're gonna look into this. But it was like a bizarre moment in the history of the world that Pope Leo was really foolish in the way that he dealt with Luther, and so Luther, in a way, got more and more radicalized because he couldn't he really couldn't stay silent, but he never wanted the schism to happen. It's just so interesting to me that he really didn't. And so, of course, I think, I mean, I'm very ecumenical as a Christian, that I just think truth is truth, and that the reformers inside the church and outside the church, they're trying to help the church, and I do think that there are moments where institutions are ossified and they don't listen to the guy trying to help them, and so I'm sure there are some Catholics who do think that. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there has been tremendous reformation within the Catholic Church in the last 5 centuries. So there's no real answer to that. But I found that in writing the story of Luther, it's just fascinating history to see how did this happen, and did it need to happen? And it definitely didn't need to happen. And that's what I find. I know the person who asked the question. That's why I'm looking back here. It did. It definitely didn't have to happen, and that I found really fascinating, that it was not something that just had to go that way. It could have gone any other way, but that's the way it went.
I had a conversation many years ago with Chris Galvin, who was the third generation of the Galvins that founded Motorola. And Motorola was under a lot of economic pressure at that time, was struggling. And he was asked in this conversation, what do you think is the root of that? Why are you guys having such a hard time? You've been such a great company. And he says, because success breeds inflexible orthodoxies.
Ooh,
And
there you go.
and you think about that, in
That's
every
true.
every setting, whether
Yeah.
it's in a country or in a church tradition, and even in marriages and other relationships, we get the sense that what got us to this point will
Well,
always be what needs to take us
absolutely,
next.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
what else is on your mind? What would you like to ask?
You can try to stump me with a geography question.
I'd have to know one to ask one. Um, I was, I really liked your explanation of the liberty requires virtue, virtue requires faith, and faith requires freedom, liberty. And what occurred to me is when I was at seminary, my understanding of liberty or freedom, biblical freedom, is not what we understand freedom to be today. But biblical freedom is the freedom to live the life that you are created by God to live. So Christ died to give us the freedom to reach our God given potential.
Mhm.
To what extent might that have been on the minds of the founders in terms of tying virtue and liberty and faith together?
Well, I think the idea, we prove ourselves to be moderns even when we talk in terms of like living out my potential, or they never would think that way. But I think it's the similar concept, right? The theology is that if God loves us, he wants us to be he created us to be, and to do what he created us to do, and to have the freedom to do that. So they would phrase it differently, but even when you use a term like pursuit of happiness, um, they were thinking along those lines. They wouldn't use the language we would use today, but it's the same kind of thing. Is what is God's will? What is God's will? And so you're to be free to do His will, not to do your will. Uh, Sometimes your will can coincide with God's will, but it was a noble idea of freedom. In fact, one of the things that I discovered in writing this Revolution book, which I'm amazed at some of the stuff that I found, because so much has been said on the Revolution, but so much still hasn't been said or seen. And I found an essay that John Adams wrote in 1765. He was 30 years old, and it is one of the most amazing essays I've ever read. And I was astonished. I'd never heard of it, and most people really haven't written about it. And in it, right in the beginning of it, he talks about what is freedom and liberty, and he defines it in this gorgeous way. It's just beautiful. It's a very biblical idea of it. It's not just license, or it's not just leave me alone, man. It's not like libertarianism. It's just a beautiful idea, but it really has at its heart that idea of virtue and of being able to live my life the way God would want me to live it, to bless others, and it really is so beautiful. So I wrote a whole chapter in my book on that essay that the 30-year-old Adams wrote, because I thought this is unknown and really beautiful. So yeah, thank you.
Os Guinness calls it ordered liberty.
Yes.
In that sense, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a purpose to the liberty.
You talked about love of country. How do we teach young people to love the country? Because I just had children graduate from college, and they're not teaching that.
You're telling me.
And on top of that, we're all donating to them.
Oh, on top of that, what?
We're all donating to the universities that are not teaching our children to love the country.
Well, if that is true, shame on you. And I mean that. Like, I have, ever since I graduated Yale, I thought, why would people you have no idea what you're giving your money to. They're not teaching, and it's gotten worse. You need to hold them accountable, to give money to it's like, well, I want my name on a wall. Good for you. But kids their heads are getting messed up. And it is really, it's dramatic. It's part of why I wrote this book and why I wrote the book on the revolution, because we have not been teaching this forever. I feel like I got the tail end in the 70s in that school of something beautiful. It's Norman Rockwell America, and it just vanished. And it didn't just vanish in the schools; it vanished in the culture. And so, I think it really is vital. I mean, first of all, if you've ever traveled to a place that's not free, I mean, I think it would be a great thing for a lot of young people to go to a place that's not free. Women should go to radically Muslim countries, see what that feels like for a couple of weeks. You may say, well, okay, but you should see what that feels like. You go to, if you're Christian, go to China and be vocal about your faith on the street and see what happens. See what happens.
Yeah.
Young people, it's just pure ignorance, and you can't really blame them. They've grown up in a world that is not teaching them this stuff. But this is really vital. This is existential. We are at a point in America where if we do not learn this kind of stuff, this goes away. This goes away. You can't, Os Guinness calls it a cut flower society. Like, it looks great, but the flower is cut from the roots. It's dying. And we have been cut off from our roots, and we have been talking about, either denigrating America or just not even just not talking about it, as though none of that matters. Just live your life, And I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, this book, for example, I wish I could give this book to, every 12th grader in America. Just read this book. And this is not some partisan screed. I mean, Dick Cavett, who's a atheist Marxist friend of mine, he really loved this book because it's just true. It's not about anything. It's just about this is what America is. You don't have to agree with it, but we need to at least be conversant in what it is.
I agree with you that I think our government is too big and too involved in our lives. But I know that people don't like to give up power. So how do we get our government to become smaller and give up that power back to the individual?
And before you answer Christy's question, which is a lot more important than mine, tell us a little bit about how you met Christ and when you did and how it affected your life.
Well, I'll answer the first question first quickly. You don't get people voluntarily to give up power. You elect people. We live in a country where we get to decide who's elected, or we should. And if we don't elect people who believe the government is too big, who are willing to slash it, we deserve a bloated government. It is our job to elect people who are going to do this. And when they do it, there's going to be screaming, and that's tough luck. That's what elections are, And if you don't like it, elect somebody else different next time. But we have to be involved in this. You don't get bloated government to to go on a diet by itself. They're not going to do it, but we're the ones that have to do it. We have to be aggressive, and I think that we've gotten to a point where we have to be. We've let it go on and on for decades and decades. Um, the So we need to elect maniacs to public office who actually believe in the idea that we've got to slash government. That I don't know how else really to do it. Make the case publicly and try to get those folks elected. Um, the story of coming to faith, I mean, I was really, I was not some bold sinner, but I was really lost in my 20s. I was just utterly lost. And I feel like I'd been catechized at Yale and after to think that there are no answers to the big questions. Like we all sort of figure, well, there's not really a God, or if there is, who knows, or whatever. I felt like I had just, I drunk that Kool-Aid. And I ended up, I was trying to be a writer, and things got things got so bad that I ended up moving back in with my parents. And if your parents are working class European immigrants and you went to Yale, you don't want to do that. Because my friends at Yale, like their parents be like, "Oh, Eric's finding himself," and my parents be like, "Yeah, Eric should find himself a job and get out of here." Like we don't, So it was a really hard time in my life. I was 24, and it was just brutal. And in that year, I got a crummy job at Union Carbide in Danbury, Connecticut, because with a Yale English degree, you can't get another kind of job. And I met a guy who was a graphic designer, and I've written about this in at least one of my books, my book Fish Out of Water, and I've spoken about it a lot. But he started sharing his faith with me, and I was kind of like, "Don't get too close with that weird conservative Christian stuff. Like, I know you people are crazy." But I was in enough pain to listen to this a little bit, not much, believe me. I was not inviting this. But in the course of the year, I think I was really doing some soul searching. And every now and again, I think I would just, I'd go for a run or something like that. And I'd say, "God, if you're there, I need a sign." Because I didn't really believe there is a God there. But if you're there, give me a sign. And one night, I had a dramatic conversion experience. It was in a dream, but it was really a vision. Jesus really spoke to me, or I don't want to really tell the story because it's kind of complicated, but there was no doubt in my mind, because I was hostile and really inoculated against that kind of thing, and I couldn't have reasoned my way toward it, or maybe it would have taken me many years. But this was just like somebody punching a hole through the sheetrock and being like, "I'm here." It just completely changed my life, literally overnight. People overuse the word literally. I mean it literally overnight. I woke up and I knew it's real. Jesus is God. The Bible is true. Now what? Now I got problems. But now I have good problems. Before I had bad problems. So it was really, it was absolutely overnight. It was around my 25th birthday, and I had the tremendous benefit of being surrounded by really wonderful people of faith, emotionally mature, fun, and I could ask all these questions. And so that sent me on the journey that I'm still on. So thanks for the question.
Do you feel there's a tipping point at which we might get to where we can't hold on to it anymore? And where might that be in your mind?
In my mind, it was the last election. I think there is a tipping point where if you don't get enough people who, or let's put it this way, there are several tipping points. One of them is fiscal. You get yourself into a situation with debt where, it's over. But that's just one tipping point. I think that there's certain fundamentals that if you don't agree on them, in other words, you need most Americans to believe in the fundamentals, like what we've always believed, what John F. Kennedy believed, whatever. And I think we've drifted pretty dramatically. And I think you get to a point where, I mean, if you have enough people in America who, let's say, they want an Islamic caliphate, that's one way you can go away from liberty, or you get enough people in America that they really believe in Marxist ideas. At some point, there's enough of that it unravels. It unravels. I mean, because truth is not whatever. Truth is, and I think that one of the reasons I wrote the book on the revolution is that I said we have to really get back to the founders' understanding of these things, and we used to all agree on that. That's what's so interesting to me is we always, we used to agree on that, but I think things have gone quite wobbly, and we need to relearn relearn these basics. It's why I wrote the book, If You Can Keep It, and it's why I wrote the book on the revolution in particular, because I thought that this stuff, you cannot hold it together unless you have enough people that buy into this. And so we will disagree on how, right? I mean, when I wrote my book on William Wilberforce, Amazing Grace, I realized it's an amazing thing that Wilberforce in England in the latter part of the 18th century, basically England had an attitude, most of the world had an attitude like, we don't care about the poor. If you have money, you have no obligation to give to the poor, to care about the poor. It just wasn't an idea, which seems unthinkable to us because we're like, what are you talking about? Everybody knows that, if I'm well-to-do or something like that, I got to give back or I got to care about the poor. We all know that. You don't need to be a Christian. Those Christian ideas have come into the culture, those biblical ideas, so that every atheist and agnostic agrees, like, we got to care for the poor, got to care for the disenfranchised. Those ideas are part of the culture. And so what amazes me is that there was a time when those ideas weren't part of the culture. Because of Wilberforce and others, he drags these biblical ideas into the culture. So now everybody in the West pretty much agrees on this. So we can disagree on how you do that, right? So, a Democrat might say, well, I think the public sector as a government, we'll do that with taxes and we'll do it this way. And the Republicans would say, I think the private sector. But we're arguing about how to help those who are disenfranchised. But if you get enough people who say, we don't care about the disenfranchised, now you got a problem. So we have to get a place where we have a basic consensus so that we can then debate how do we get there. But I do think there's no question that we've come close in some ways lately in a scary way. So yeah, that's why I think we got to take it seriously now on the 250th anniversary of the nation's birth. And I don't know if anybody here knows this, but the official term for the 250th, do you know what it is? Some people know. This is a very quiet, shy crowd. Are they always this way?
They are.
What's wrong? What happened?
I don't know. They're in prayer.
The term is supercentennial. Has anybody heard that term? Supercentennial. Write it down. Supercentennial. Because most of us here remember the bicentennial. We were all excited. It's the bicentennial year. So I think this is a moment, because it's the supercentennial, because it's the 250th, that Americans are forced to talk about our history and our, what it's just kind of, it's much easier for us to do that right now. And I think we need to seize this opportunity to talk about the history and all this kind of stuff. I think there's a moment. So I am actually very hopeful.
Yeah, good.
Thanks for all your remarks. Incredible stuff. We're grateful to have you here. A weekend or so ago, we went to Washington, D.C. We happened to go to the Jefferson Memorial. And I was kind of shocked to read on the walls these words: God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Now, this is Thomas Jefferson. Who was
That's the shock, is that's
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson,
Right.
who everybody goes on and on and on. Oh, he's a deist. He doesn't really, it's like, I'll take that kind of deism all day long.
Yes, indeed. That's the exact reaction I had. But we hear the term Christian nationalism bandied about.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, if you read Jefferson, that sounds a little bit like Christian
Yeah.
nationalism. But there are those, rightly so perhaps, who think that it might turn into some sort of Nazi-type theocracy.
Is that
So-
bad? Are you against the Nazis? Is he want to
Yeah,
come out
a
and
little
like
bit.
the Nazis?
So how do you separate those two?
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question, because I think, first of all, we live in a culture where, words, you always have to ask, what does a word mean? Usually Christian nationalism is used as a pejorative to call somebody a fascist. So if I say I want to live out my faith and bring the values of the Bible into the public sphere and into politics, people say, you're a Christian nationalist. It's an utterly idiotic statement because that's what abolition was. They were Christians who said slavery is immoral and we need to act against it and do what we can. And the people who loved slavery, they couldn't think of the term Christian nationalism, but they called them anything in any name in the book. So Christian nationalism is one of those loaded terms that you have to ask who's using it. I think that we are in far less danger of, I mean, look, because I wrote this book on Bonhoeffer, I'm well aware of what bad nationalism can look like. But what about what good nationalism can look like? If your leader is Adolf Hitler, that's going to be bad nationalism. If your leader is George Washington, it's going to be good nationalism. The idea that we've all lived during a time in the last 5 or so years where the word nationalism has been twisted into something dirty, and you think, what is national? I'm not going to make an idol of America. I'm not going to make an idol of my wife or my family, but I love my wife and I love my family. But you don't make an idol of it. So you don't make an idol of the nation. That leads to lunacy and fascism and whatever. But loving your nation, in other words, you can go too far in the opposite direction. So you say, well, I don't want to make an idol of loving my country. Patriotism, oh, that leads to Nazism. It's like, no. You can, if you do not love your country sufficiently, that will lead to other kinds of equally horrible problems. We need to love our country in a healthy way. And so the term Christian nationalism is usually just used by people who are either secular or they have a problem with Christian faith, and they use it as a bludgeon. Some Christians use the term Christian nationalism, like, yeah, I'm a Christian nationalist, I believe in this and this. I don't think it's helpful to use the term. I just think it's a bad term. And I think, like a lot of terms, it's just designed, it's just a clever way of saying, shut up, right? Like, I don't like what you're saying. So you're a Christian nationalist, shut up. You're transphobic, you're racist, shut up. It's like, that's not leading to dialogue. So I think nationalism is a healthy thing. It's a beautiful thing. As I said, my parents came to this country from other countries. They taught me to love this country. And loving this country means criticizing it, loving this country, so but when people throw terms around, we always have to be careful. Who's saying that? Why are they saying that? Is it to be helpful or is it just to shut me up? And usually unfortunately, that's what it is.
Sometimes I think young people, especially that I've talked to, when they're using that term, what they're concerned about is people, Christians behaving badly who have national influence. And they're concerned then about the character. Is there enough virtue? And it really isn't it. It's a question about virtue
Yeah.
in American life that makes people uncomfortable with a particular brand of
Yeah.
patriotism.
Right.
This question is, you said a very specific standard in this book, the one we're talking about tonight, liberty grounded in virtue and truth. That's our goal. Liberty grounded in virtue and truth, the golden triangle. By that standard alone, how do you honestly assess where the Republic stands today?
I have said many times that I think we're in the third existential crisis of our history. The first is the revolution, the second is the Civil War, and we're in the third existential crisis now. And we're dealing with stuff we've never dealt with before. But when I say existential crisis, meaning that if we lose it all. We can lose America forever. And that's why if you can keep it is it's an important thing. Keeping this country, understanding what we have, understanding there's not America 2.0 waiting in the wings. Waiting in the wings is China, where they don't believe in freedom. They don't believe. I just had a guy on my podcast who talked about, it's so horrible. You want to believe it's not true. Kind of like you don't want to believe the death camps actually it never happened. I don't want to believe it happened. It happened. Human beings can do evil things. And in China, if you are an enemy of the Communist Party, you're a Uyghur Muslim, you're a member of Falun Gong, which is a religious group, you're a Christian, they now have the technology. Now, if the Nazis had the technology, they would have used it all day long. They didn't. But they now have the technology to put you in prison camps, which they're doing, right? You're not hearing about this, but this is not something I'm making up. Unfortunately, you can look this up. And the book that just came out is called Killed to Order, about this. But if you are an atheist communist government, you don't believe we're made in God's image. You don't believe human life is sacred. So if you have political enemies, why wouldn't you kill them? And if you can make some money off of their body, why wouldn't you do that? What's the logical reason not to do that? There's no logical reason. If you are a strict Marxist atheist that believes the state is most important, and you need to kill some people, you kill some people, right? Now, we would say you can't do that. That's murder, and the government doesn't. They would say, well, we don't believe that. We're atheist Marxists. So they have for almost 2 decades now. They know that they can make huge money on the world market with organs, okay? So you got a healthy 25-year-old member of Falun Gong or Uyghur Muslim. There's a sheik, in the Arab Emirates or someplace there that wants to pay for a Muslim. They don't want a contaminated organ or whatever. They want it from a Muslim. So the Chinese say, well, we can do that. We got a market here. We're gonna kill that guy, and they're doing this. Read the book Killed to Order and see what you think, because I wish it were a conspiracy theory. That would be great. But and China can make a ton of money off this. They can charge $100,000 for that organ. They can make $400,000 to $500,000 per young person whose organs they harvest. Now you think that's so sick, but it follows logically if you don't have a worldview that says we are sacred, we're made in God's image, every human life is sacred. We can't do that. If you don't believe that, why not do that? The Nazis didn't believe that. So we are now, I think, in an existential crisis because many people in America don't know what they believe. And so if you don't know what you believe, why wouldn't you go along with that? If you can make money going in that direction, or if you can make money just looking the other way if somebody wants to do that. So you're dealing with a number of problems. I just mentioned Marxist atheism in China. It's very real. And I think there are many young people, particularly in America, that they don't have an ideological problem with that. They go, well, we all have different ideas. Those are some pernicious ideas. Islamofascism is very real. I don't need to get into that. These things are threats to American liberty. And I really do believe that we are in the third existential crisis. We have to figure out what we believe, and enough people have to believe it and be willing to live it out and die for it in the same way that patriots have died in this country from the beginning. Patriots, usually young men, have died for the truth, for what they believed, and we're supposed to honor them with how we live. And so you have to understand that. You have to understand those who those people were who sacrificed everything, who today are sacrificing for us one way or the other. If you don't do that, you lose it. And so I really do think that we're in that existential crisis. I believe we will win, that God's will prevail, but it doesn't mean that it's not a fight, just as the previous two were fights. So I don't know if it's a kinetic war or hot war. I hope not, but it's a battle. It's certainly a spiritual battle. So I am sanguine about our chances, but I do think we have to take it seriously.
Wow, we're going to stop right there at that place of challenge. And I just want to express on behalf of all of us, Eric, how much we appreciate the challenge, the provocative thinking that we've gotten here today. Shall we just express our gratitude to our friend for this?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Wow. That's too much. Thank you. That's so kind. Thank you.
I want to say thanks again for coming. I want to give one last little advertisement. You heard Oz Guinness spoken of many times this evening. Oz is our preacher this Sunday morning at 9 o'clock right here. And if you'd like to hear Oz speak, he would be thrilled to meet you as well. And Oz's extraordinary book, The Magna Carta of Humanity, is another one of those must-read books that speak about so many of these issues that Eric has articulated eloquently for us tonight. So as he makes his way out, let me close this in prayer. Our gracious God, we thank you that you have allowed us a part in the cultivation of your extraordinary creation. We recognize that as a grace, not just that there is a creation, not just that we have been born into and live in a nation that has so many marvelous freedoms and still much remaining virtue that we cherish as well, but that you have given us the chance to play a part in shaping its future. Would you just move us, God, to not just sit by idly and watch history happen, but be part of the shapers of history in any way that we can, as we use our gifts, as we use our voice, as we engage respectfully and humbly and courageously in conversations with our neighbors. Would you just move through us for good, we pray, in your loving name. Amen. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Stay as long as you can outside, and we'll see you again soon.